The last Mishnah, Mesechta Chagiga, which really the entire parak, Chaim B'Kodesh, the last parak of Mesechta Chagiga, has been very focused on halachas of Tumah Tahara, and one of the primary halachas that have been discussed in this halacha, in this Mishnah parak, over and over again, is the concept of Tumas Amoritz. Chazal were extremely concerned that Amoratzim were not careful to make sure that what they came in contact with remained tahor. And as Rashi at the beginning of this Mishnah explained, particularly when it comes to the Shalosh Regalim, and everybody came to Yerushalayim, even the Amoratzim, and even Kohanim who were Amoratzim, entered the Beis HaMikdash, entered the Azara, and came in contact with the various Kli HaMikdash. And that's why our Mishnah taught us that they all had to be taken to the mikveh after Yontif to be matar them. Says the Mishnah, Kol Kelim Shai B'Mikdash. That's why all the Kelim that were in the Beis HaMikdash, Tunim Tefillah, have to be taken to the mikveh. Chutz mi Mizbach Hazav, aside from the Mizbach Hazav, or Mizbach HaNechoshes, or Mizbach HaNechoshes, Bnei Shein Kekarka. They're considered karka, and anything that's considered karka, as the Pasuk calls it, Mizbach Adama, the Mizbeach that was in the Azara, the Mizbeach HaNechoshes is called Mizbach Adama, and the Mizbeach has, in the inside the Beis HaMikdash, the Mizbach Hazav is compared to it, is connected to it, so they're considered karka, and anything that's karka is not Mekabel Tumah Divrei Rebbe Lezer. Parenthetically, this is a question that's very often discussed. Many individuals buy different types of kalim for their home that are made out of material and are used, that need tefillah, glass, metal, and also metal particularly, but they're the type of kalim that you can't take to the mikveh, because if you're going to take it to the mikveh, they all have these computers and all different types of wiring inside that if you take it to the mikveh, you may permanently ruin them. So it's an interesting question. What do you do? On one hand, we're not allowed to use a keli without taking it to the mikveh. On the other hand, if we're going to ruin the keli, we're not going to have much use out of it. So one of the haterim that some of the poskim suggest is, since this keli, this vessel, can only be used when it's plugged into the electricity, so then it's mechubel karka. And something that's mechubel karka, we just learned in the Mishnah, is not mekabel tumah. But it's not that simple, because indeed, as our Mishnah is very clear, when it comes to hilchas tumah v'tahara, something that's mechubel karka is not mekabel tumah. But it's not clear that when the Torah tells us that we have to be toivel, we have to take a keli to the mikveh, is that a concept of tumah tahara in the traditional sense? Or is that a new halacha that the Torah wants, that when the keli is leaving the property of a Nachri and coming to Yisrael, part of its elevation is that it be taken to the mikveh? So it's not connected to Hilchos Tumah v'Tahara. So again, it's a very interesting question, and there are poskim, however, that do use this heter, not the only heter, but as part of a concept and part of a reasoning to be a little more lenient on these type of kalim. And again, I stress only in a situation where it's impossible to be toivel them, because you're certainly going to ruin them by toiveling them. Back to our Mishnah. V'cham say that B'nei Shein Mitzupim. So what that means is that the Chum is saying that the kalim in the Beis HaMikdash were gold-plated or copper-plated, and that's all the Mishnah said. And it's difficult to understand, what does the Mishnah mean with these words of Bnei Shein Mitzupim. So we'll start learning the Gemara, where the Gemara discusses actually this question. First, the Gemara, which we don't have really time to go into the whole Gemara, goes into a discussion when we have a wood keli, as it was in the Mishnah, as it was in the Mishkan, plated with copper or silver or gold. What do we look at? Do we look at the keli, or do we look at the keli, or do we look at the copper or the plating? And the Gemara says that it's we look at the wood. That's what the primary material is that it's made out of. And kli eitz ha'osil nachas, if something that's meant, a wood keli that's meant to be stationary, isn't mekabel tumah. Because the Torah, when it says that kli eitz is mekabel tumah, it says it has to be similar to a sack, to a bag. And just like the Gemara says, mas sak metaltel moli v'reikon, a bag is moved both when it's full and empty. So too, a kli eitz is only mekabel tumah when it's movable. But if it's meant to be stationary, it's not mekabel tumah. That's also why the halacha is that a pshuti kli eitz, a kli eitz that doesn't have a receptacle, is also not mekabel tumah, because it's not like a sack, it's not like a bag. So now the Gemara towards the end of the Mesechta on Daf Chav Zayin and Aleph quotes the line of the Mishnah that we just focused on. The Mishnah said, "V'cham oimrim neishet supim," and it seems that the Chama is saying because these kalim are plated, that's why they're not mekabel tumah. Ask the Gemara, Adrabba, kiva the mitzupaninhu, if they're plated, then they ought to be tamei. Let's understand the Gemara's question. If we're going to look at the primary material, what they are made out of, so then we understand it's made out of wood. And as we just explained a moment ago, it's kli eitz ha'osil nachas, not mekabel tumah. But if we're looking at the plating is gold, copper. There are these rules that I just mentioned about kli eitz don't apply by gold and copper. So why are the Chacham saying that they're tar because of the plating? On the contrary, they ought to be tamei because of the plating. Ema, so says the Gemara, indeed. The way to understand the Mishnah is the Chacham are saying mitamim, mimnei shem mitzupim. We look at the plating, and because we look at the plating, that's why we have to say the keli is tamei. V'bay seima, but a different way of understanding the Mishnah. Rabbanan l'Rebbe Lezer kamri. Rabbanan are addressing Rebbe Lezer, and they are saying to Rebbe Lezer, ma datach, what's your reasoning to say that they're tahor, because they're adama, and the pasuk calls them adama, and therefore you should say that tamei b'shum the mitzupim, that we don't consider them a kli eitz. The Torah doesn't call them a kli eitz, so we can't give them the rules of a kli eitz, and therefore we should look at the plating. No, we don't look at the plating. Miftal bottle tzipuin gabayu. The plating is insignificant when we look at the keli, and since the plating is insignificant, we don't look at it, we look at the actual keli. So we have here a very fundamental machlokes, Rashi and the Rambam, how to learn the Gemara. So Rashi, which is the pshat that we just quoted, says the Gemara calls them kli adama, the Torah calls them kli adama, and then the Gemara says we should look at the plating, and the plating is a kli matris, it's gold, copper, and therefore the Gemara says that we don't look at the plating, but the Torah calls it eitz, and once the Torah calls it a kli eitz, it has a din of a kli eitz, and it's not mekabel tumah. The Rambam in the Pirush Mishnayos takes a different reasoning. Rambam says that mishpnei shem mitzupim is a reason to be matar them, and the Rambam has a very interesting approach. He discusses it in the Pirush Mishnayos, and he ultimately paskins this way in the Yad Chazakah. The Rambam paskins that when you have a keli that's plated, it's not going to be mekabel tumah. And the reason the Rambam holds it's not mekabel tumah, because whatever you look at, there's a reason not to make that what counts. If we're going to look at the actual keli, so the actual keli is covered. So why should I count? Why do I look at the actual keli? I can't pay attention to it. If I'm going to look at the plating is insignificant. So the Rambam's pshat in the Gemara is like this. Memneisha mitzupim is not a reason for them to be tamei. It's a reason why it should be tar. And because the Torah is teaching us, according to the Rambam's understanding of the Gemara, that any keli that's mitzupah is not mekabel tumah, because we can't look at the tzipui, nor can we look at the actual keli. So just to summarize the machlokes of Rashi and the Rambam according to the Rashi, when the Gemara uses the words Meshumta Mitzupim, is a reason why the Keli should be Tameh, because the Tzipui is made out of gold and copper. And according to the Rambam, Meshumta Mitzupim is a reason why it should be Tahor, because the Tzipui is always considered insignificant. So the Rebbe, Zeichet Tzadik Levracha, Lubavitcher Rebbe, says that when we look at this machlokes of Rashi and the Rambam, he says it's a fundamental machlokes. We could almost use the words that's relevant l'chol Torah kula, because the Rebbe says as follows: we're explaining, as the Gemara just said, Rabbanan Rabbi Lezer Kamri. Rabbanan were addressing Rabbi Lezer. They're trying to explain the opinion of Rabbi Lezer, and we also know throughout Shas that Rabbi Lezer is Shamutihu. Rabbi Lezer is considered one of the Talmidim of Beis Shammai. So, says the Rebbe, that we could assume that Rabbi Lezer in this Gemara, no Mishnah Gemara, no different than anywhere else in Shas, is following the opinion of Beis Shammai. And the Chachamim are following on the opinion of Beis Hillel. And the Rebbe wants to suggest that if we look for a common denominator, if we look for a common theme between many of the machlokes of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, they all are connected to one theme. And that is, how does the halacha view a situation? Do we look at the situation at what is in front of us? Do we look at what's in front of us, and that's the only thing that counts? Or are we to look at all the details that make up the situation that I am facing? That's, the Rebbe says, the machlokes of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And as we're going to quote, the Rebbe gives a number of examples where we see that this is the opinion of Beis Shammai. We look at the picture that's in front of us, and therefore we don't look at all the details. And the Beis Hillel says we look at all the details. The Rebbe's first raya is from a Gemara in Mesechta Sanhedrin, Davov. The Gemara says that when we have it in Torah, so the Gemara says, Beis Shammai says, that we look, that ein l'dayin el masha ein avrayos. The dayan sees the facts as they are presented to him, and based on those facts, based on what the halacha is, then we paskin the shayla. Beis Hillel's opinion is that we have to look at all the details. We have to look at all the background. We don't just look at what's in front of us. We have to look at everything. And all of those details are critical in making our decision. In fact, to support that understanding, the Gemara often, when it speaks about the Torah, uses the words, Kol dayin shedon din emes lamitai. And I saw that the Beis Yosef asks a question. Why did the Gemara use the words dayin shedon din emes lamitai? Of course, the dayin is doing a din emes. What's the word lamitai? The Gemara is teaching us a very important concept. You'll have a dayin, gets a din Torah. He's judging the case. And he heard what the witnesses said. He got all the facts. And then he takes out the Shulchan Aruch. And based on the facts in the Shulchan Aruch, he paskins. The Shulchan Aruch says that Ruvain is chayiv, Shimon is chayiv, whatever. But the dayan says there's something wrong here. There's something wrong here. I'm not ready to paskin that way because there's something that seems incorrect. Many people call that the fifth Shulchan Aruch. But whatever we'll call it. So the Gemara says, Beis Yosef, that a dayan shouldn't paskin. All the facts are there. The Gemara adds that word. Dayan shadon din emes lamitai. But Beis Shammai, as the Rebbe says, ein l'dayan el masha ein avrayos. This is what you see, and this is what you got. Another example the Rebbe gives. The Gemara Mesechta Brachos Daf Nun Aleph Amud Beis has a machlokes. What is the proper bracha in the nusach habracha that we make Motzei Shabbos by Havdalah on the fire? Beis Shammai Amrim Shabara Ma'or Heish. And Beis Hillel Amrim Bayrei Ma'orei Heish. So the Gemara explains the Beis Shammai Savri Chad Nuri Ike B'Noira. there's only one flame in the fire. And Beis Hillel Savri, Tu v'nura ikka b'nura. There are many different flames that make up that flame that we're looking at. And that's why, according to Beis Shammai, we say Moire Mar Ha'esh, because we only have one flame. Beis Hillel says we Moire Ha'esh, because there are many flames making up that flame that's in front of me. Says the Gemara, Tanya Nami Hachi, Amlan Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel, to support their opinion, says, Harbe Yesh Ba'ar. There are many different flames that make up your fire. And that's why you have to say Ma'orei Lashon Rabim. So the Rebbe asked the obvious question. How could Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel have a machlokes over the facts? You can have a machlokes in halacha. But everybody knows that when you have a flame, it's made up of different fires. So how could Beis Shammai disagree when Beis Hillel says Tu v'nura ikka b'nayra, that there are many flames that make up your flame? How can anybody dispute that? So the Rebbe says, of course, there's no machlokes in the Metzias. There's everybody. Beis Shammai is not disagreeing that is what makes a fire. Beis Shammai's opinion, says the Rebbe, is that when I look at a fire, when you walk into a room and there's a candle on, there's a fire on, do you see many flames? You don't see many different things. You see a flame, you see a fire. And that's what Beis Shammai's opinion is. I look at what's in front of me. And what's in front of me is a flame with one fire burning. That's why I say Mar Ha'esh. And Beis Hillel says, no, we have to dig deeper. We'll have to look into the details. And when you look into the details, there's Ma'orei Ha'esh. There are many flames here, and they say, Beis Hillel always says, look at all the details before you're going to make a decision. And I saw a very interesting question. Havdalah is made every Motzei Shabbos. So, what happened before Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? What happened the week before Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel had this discussion in the yeshiva? What the right nusach is? What did they do? So I saw that the Sfarim suggest, and I think with the Lubavitcher Rebbe's explanation, it's geschmack. There was always this debate in Klal Yisrael. There was always this debate in Klal Yisrael how to look at situations. Is it important to look at what's in front of me, or do I look at the big picture, or do I look at the details? And therefore, there were always people that made Ma'orei Ha'esh, like Beis Shammai suggests. And there were always people that made a Ma'orei Ha'esh, like Beis Shammai says. And there were always people that made a Ma'orei Ha'esh, because it's really not just a reflection of halacha. It's a reflection of a personality. It's a reflection of a perspective to life. And that permeates and affects every area. And there wasn't a new machlokes. They were just recording what was in existence from before. Then the Rebbe quotes another Gemara, a very famous Gemara, a Gemara Mesechta Ksubis Daf Tezayin. The Gemara says, Keitza Merakdim Lifnei Akala. We all know, how do we dance in front of a Kala? Beis Shammai Amrim, Kala Kamoshehi. We have to say the facts. Whatever are the facts about this Kala, that's what we should say. But Beis Hillel Amrim, no, we should say, Kala Novach Suda. We should say that this Kala is beautiful. We should say this Kala is wonderful. Says the Gemara. Amlan Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. So Beis Shammai says to Beis Hillel, Harei Shoysa Chigeres. If Nebuch there's a Kala who can't walk, a Suma, a Kala who's blind, are we going to say, Omrim La, are we going to sing Kala Novach Suda? Are we going to sing that this Kala is beautiful? Vatayra Amra, but it's a din in the Torah in Parshas Mishpatim, Midvash Sheket Tirchak, we're not allowed to lie. So you have somebody who's not Kala V'Novach Suda. How am I going to say something which is patently untrue? Amlahem Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. So Beis Hillel respond to Beis Shammai, L'divreichem, according to you, Mishalakha Rekach Ram and Ashuk. If somebody bought something, he got into a bad deal. So the person didn't do such a great deal. So now when I meet that person, ask Beis Hillel to Beis Shammai, Yishav Chena Be'enav, should I make him feel good, or Yagena B'fanav? Or should I make him feel bad? Of course, We all know that proper manners require that yishav chena be'einav, that we should say that's good. So here too, we have to say what's good, even though if it's not the truth. But if we think about this dialogue, Beis Hillel has an answer to Beis Shammai's question. Yes, Beis Hillel is telling Beis Shammai how to behave. The way to behave is to make people feel good. But Beis Shammai said that the Torah says mitvashek eterchak. You're not allowed to lie. So how am I saying that this kala is a kala nova chsuda when she isn't? What does Beis Hillel say to that? The answer, says the Rebbe, is right back to what we've been discussing. According to Beis Shammai, we look at what we see. Kala k'moshehi. This is what we have, this is what we see, and this is what we say. This person is feeling bad. What could I do? What does Beis Hillel say to Beis Shammai? Beis Hillel says we need to dig down. And every person who might not look that great and may have different deficiencies, but everybody has something good about them. And everybody is beautiful. It may take a little time to see the beauty and make time to see that this individual is chasuda, is a wonderful person. But Beis Hillel says that's what we're supposed to do. We're not just supposed to look at what's superficial. We're not just supposed to look at what's in front of our face. We're supposed to look at kala nova chasuda. We're supposed to dig down. And if we'll dig down, we will see that this kala is indeed a beautiful kala. And when we'll recognize that this kala is a beautiful kala, we'll have every right to say kala nova chasuda. I saw Rabbi Chanan Wasserman asks a gewaldige kasha. He says, you come to a wedding, and the Gemara says we're supposed to praise the kala. Why are we supposed to praise the kala? We're supposed to praise the chassan. A chassan is obligated to get married. The chassan has a mitzvah of pururivya. A kala doesn't have a mitzvah of pururivya. So why are we praising the kala? Why aren't we praising the chassan? He's the main actor here. So I saw Rabbi Chanan answers. A person has come to do a mitzvah. A wonderful, wonderful opportunity to do a mitzvah. So yes, it's the chassan who's the main actor. It's the chassan who's going to do the mitzvah. But we want that the chassan should do the mitzvah with a geschmack. So how do we get the chassan to do the mitzvah with a geschmack? We tell him, this kala that you're about to marry, she's a kala nova chsuda. She's great. And even if she doesn't look great, find something nice to say about her, so that he'll be anxious. He'll be anxious to do the mitzvah. And therefore, because he's anxious to do the mitzvah, he'll be able to do the mitzvah. The Baal Shem said that when we sing by a chasna, and when we praise a kala by the chasna, they're tefillas. What's pshat that they're tefillas? We're dancing, we're singing. We're davening that the chassan should realize I'm getting married, and I'm having now the opportunity to do a wonderful mitzvah. And we want to encourage him to do the mitzvah. How do we encourage him to do the mitzvah? By telling him it's a kala nova chsuda, that she's a wonderful kala. And I saw a gewaldige pshat, that what's pshat that was particularly happy by a wedding. Why by a chasana do we see more simcha than by any other occasion? So Rav David Jungreis, the Rosh Bezdin at Eidach Reidus in Shalayim Zatzal, explains, because when a couple is getting married, they're accomplishing why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world that people should get married, and people should have children and populate the world. So if that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, so every wedding is an opportunity to accomplish that. And we want to encourage this couple to do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent them and us to this world. So that's why Beis Hillel says, don't just look at what you see. If you look at what you see, you won't have what to be encouraged about. Dig deeper and see that this kala is no v'chasuda. And like that, they'll be excited about getting married. They'll be excited about building another Jewish family for which the world was created. And the Rebbe says, the Gemara says, that mikan amr chachamim la'olam data shel adam merevas and brias. A person, we always understand data merevas and brias as a person should get along with other people. The Rebbe says data merevas and brias is to pay attention to every individual, and every individual is different. And our job is to look, says Beis Hillel, at what makes this individual special, what makes this individual unique. What does it mean, I'm never going to be in the place of my friend. Of course you'll never be in the place of my friend. But I need to look at what he is all about, what she is all about. And then I'll see that they have wonderful qualities. And therefore, when we'll realize that they have wonderful qualities, we'll be able to praise them, and the chassan will be happy with this marriage. Another example the Rebbe gives, a very famous Gemara, the beginning of Mesechta Nida. The Gemara Mesechta Nidus discusses a situation where a woman starts having her period. A woman starts seeing dam. But she did not know exactly at what moment it happened. So Beis Shammai's opinion is, dain shatan. I know now she's tamei, that's all that counts. I don't start considering and observing that maybe this was here from before. And Beis Hillel's opinion is much stricter. Hillel Omer, b'pkida, we have to be concerned that she started seeing dam from the moment the last time she examined herself, and says Beis Hillel, afilu liyamim harbe, even if it was many days ago. Since I can't definitively know when this started, I have to be machmer and go back to when I know she was tahor. And any moment after I'm certain she's tahor, I have to say she's tahor. And the Gemara Mesechta Nida explains, Shammai's opinion is, Hamad Isha el Chaskasa. We have to look at what we see. Visha becheskes tara medus. We know that this woman was tahor. When does she lose that cheskes tara? When I see she's not tahor. Do I know for sure that this was the moment that she became tamei? Maybe she became tamei a day ago. Maybe she became tamei a week ago. I don't know. But I don't have to know, says Beis Shammai. I have to know what I see. Ki amad hamad davar cheskasai. When do we say we look at what we see? When we have no problem. The woman knows that she had a riyah, the dam came out, so both of them are right. So what's the basis of their machlokes? Explains the Rebbe. The Beis Shammai's opinion is that I have to judge what I see. And I see now she's tamei. That's all that I know. I don't have to think about what happened in the past. I have to think about what happened right now. And right now she's tamei, and that's why I say she's tamei. Before now, she was tahor. And I have no definitive proof that she wasn't. And therefore, I say till now she was tahor, this moment she's tamei. What's Beis Hillel's opinion? Beis Hillel's opinion is that we can't have such a superficial observation. Our observation has to recognize everything that might have happened. And just because I only see the dam now, doesn't mean in any way that there wasn't dam here from before. Certainly, there might have been dam here from before. We can't make believe that it wasn't there. And therefore, Beis Hillel disagrees with Beis Shammai and says that we have to look at that, and we have to be concerned about that, and we have to say that we cannot consider this woman tar only from the moment that I knew for sure she was tar. But after the moment that I knew she was tar expires, I have to be machmer. The Rebbe gives another example, another very famous Gemara. Gemara Mesechta Shabbos, Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph. The Gemara over there, Beis Shammai seems to be correct. We know Gerus requires Kabbalah's mitzvahs. Kabbalah's all of the mitzvahs. And these individuals that came in with these conditions, certainly it doesn't seem that it's a situation of Kabbalah's mitzvahs. So how do we understand Beis Hillel? And if we'll indeed suggest that the halacha doesn't require such a strict Kabbalah's mitzvahs, then Beis Hillel is correct. What is the basis of the machlokes of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? But according to the Vart, according to the theme that we've been developing, it's fantastic. Beis Shammai opinion is Ein L'dayin Ela Ma She'ein Avros. We only look at what's in front of us. What do we see in front of us? What we see in front of us is a person that's making conditions that are certainly not consistent with what the halacha requires. Beis Hillel, on the other hand, says, there's something going on here. Let's delve into it. Let's try to understand and examine what's behind the scare. And when we try to understand what's driving this individual, we may discover that this individual is sincere and does deserve to be a ger. And because Beis Hillel, to their theme, holds that we look at the details. And I have to say that as I was learning this Vart from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I saw a beautiful, beautiful Vart from the Bava Rebbe Zatzal. He said, how do we understand this machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? I think that the Bava Rebbe was bothered with the same question that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was bothered. How did Beis Hillel accept Beis Shammai? How did Beis Hillel accept these gerim when they had these conditions which seems to be different than what the halacha requires? And it's also interesting, which many Mefarshim asked the question, when the Gemara wants to express that Beis Shammai did not accept them to be gerim, the Gemara always uses the same wording. Dochvei b'amas habinyan. He pushed them away with a stick that's used to build. We understand Beis Shammai wasn't ready to accept the gerus. Why did they need that tool to push them away? So Bava Rebbe wants to suggest, when you look at a home, so you could come and look at a home and you could see a beautiful home. That's true. But the person who built the home doesn't see a beautiful home. You know what he sees? He remembers every brick I laid, and every nail I knocked into the wall, and every day that I had a headache with a supplier. Beis Shammai says, I look at the binyan. You have to look at the binyan, you don't look at the details. And if their binyan, if what they're saying is unacceptable, then I can't accept them to be a ger. Beis Hillel says, no, I look at all the experiences that make up an individual. And if I look at the experience which make up this individual, I may understand why he said what he said. And it isn't necessarily that just because he said something which we would never be comfortable with, that we should say that you're not going to be able to be a ger. The Rebbe gives one more example. Again, traveling through Shas. The Gemara Mesechta Chulin Daf Kuf Dalet Amud Beis discusses a oif oile magvina al shulchan ve'en nechel. Divrei Beis Shammai. According to Beis Shammai, you could have poultry and dairy on the same table. Of course, I can't eat them at the same time. You can't have them on the table, and certainly you can't eat them together. So the Rebbe says, what's the machlokes here? And this is, again, a machlokes where Beis Shammai is the mekel and Beis Hillel is the machmer. So I think the pshat in this machlokes is that, the Rebbe says the pshat in the machlokes, Beis Shammai says you're not allowed to eat poultry with dairy. I'm not eating poultry with dairy. The fact that they're on the table, that has nothing to do with what I'm eating. Beis Hillel says, no, I have to look at all the circumstances. What's going on here? And if I'm going to have poultry and dairy on the same table, there's a real concern that I'm going to eat them together. And you can't ignore those concerns. You can't ignore the details. And before we go back to the Rebbe Sicha, and we go back how the Rebbe uses this Vart to explain the Gemara that we're learning here at the end of Mesechta Chagiga, I actually saw that we had in our Mesechta on Daf Yud Beis a very famous machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel had a dispute how the world was created. Shemayim nivra tchila v'achach nivras aretz. According to Beis Shammai, first the Shemayim was built, it was created, and then the aretz. Ubeis Hillel oimrim, aretz nivras tchila v'achach Shemayim. First this world was created, and then the Shemayim. And the Gemara goes back and forth with rayas, Beis Shammai's rayas, Beis Hillel's rayas. But if you learn this Gemara, there's a fundamental question. Baruch Hashem, we live in this world. We should all live gesundheit in the world. So what's the difference how it was created? The Shemayim was first or the Aretz was first? The world is the way we see the world. There's no arguing how the world looks. They both see the same world. Why is the Gemara and why Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel so focused on how the world was created? So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said a gewaltige Wort. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said that this is exactly, it's mamash the same Wort as the Rebbe Zatzal. The Shlomo Zalman says that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel both agree that what are we in the world for? We're in the world for Shemayim. We're in the world to do the Melechas Hashem. And that's why Beis Shammai says, Shemayim nivra tchila. You got to keep your eye on the ball. The eye on your ball is the Shemayim. Aretz, it's of course we have an Aretz, but that's only secondary. I always have to keep in mind the main point. Beis Hillel says, no, we don't ignore the details, because the tachlis is only achieved through the details. And what is the way we reach Shemayim? With this world. And that's why Beis Hillel says, Aretz nivras tchila, and then Shemayim. And he says that, and again, it's fantastic, as I found this Vart, that Rav Shlomo Zalman is taking the exact same approach as the Rebbe Zatzal. He says there's another machlokes, a machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, how a Jew is supposed to prepare for Shabbos. A Jew is supposed to prepare for Shabbos, Chad l'Shabbos l'Shabbosa. Beis Shammai's opinion was, I go to the store Sunday and I see something that's going to be good for Shabbos, I really start thinking about Shabbos. Then, if on Monday I find something better, so I take the thing I found on Sunday and eat it and put the Monday purchase for Shabbos. And so I live my whole life. And Beis Hillel says, Baruch Hashem yoim yoim. Again, Beis Shammai says, I look at the tachlis. What is the tachlis? Shabbos. So my whole week is keeping my eye on the tachlis, Shabbos. Beis Hillel says, no. The details to get to the tachlis are also important. And therefore he says, Baruch Hashem, yoim yoim, every day of the week. Not just Shabbos, but Baruch Hashem, yoim yoim. And Rav Shlomo Zalman gives one more raya. I'm sure the Rebbe thought of these rayas, he just wanted to keep the sikha within a time frame. The Rav Shlomo Zalman says, the famous machlokes, how many candles do you light on Hanukkah? Beis Shammai says you start the first night with 8, and then you go down 7, 6, 5. And Beis Hillel says, Beis Shammai holds Peiches v'Hoilech, and Beis Hillel holds Mois v'Hoilech. 1, 2, 3, 4. What's the machlokes? Beis Shammai says, I look for the tachlis. What's the ultimate goal of Hanukkah? Where is the greatest nace evident? After 8 days of using that same oil. So of course I start with the 8th day. That's the tachlis. Then I go backwards. Beis Hillel says, no, every detail leading up to the 8th day is crucial. And that's why Beis Hillel holds that we go Moshe v'Hoilech. Day 1 is important, and then I go further to day 2. Again, the very similar concept. So now back to our Gemara. We have the machlokes in our Gemara about how to look at a plated vessel. The Rambam's opinion is that we look at the tzipui. We look at the vessel that's in front of us that has a plating, but it's only a plating. And I don't look what's under it. Because what's Beis Shammai's opinion, according to the Rambam? That I always look at what's in front of me. Since I always look at what's in front of me, I see a plating in front of me. So now the halacha has to start deciding, how does a tzipui look? Does a tzipui have value in halacha? And the Rambam says that a tzipui is really insignificant and it doesn't have value in halacha. And that's why Rebbe Lezer, who was Shamuti, Rebbe Lezer, who was a Talmud of Beis Shammai, took that approach to the keli. And that's why he would say a keli that's mitzupah is tahar. And that's why the Rambam says a keli that's mitzupah is tahar. The Chachamim, who are following the opinion of Beis Hillel, The opinion of Beis Hillel is that we look at all the details. And we don't just look at the tzipui, we look what's under the tzipui. So, do I follow the tzipui or do I follow the keli? But I can't just say, I'm only going to look at the tzipui and not look at the keli. And that's the machlokes, says the Rambam, of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, which is in our Mishnah, in our Gemara, the machlokes of Rabbi Elazar and the Chachamim. And now the Rebbe takes this one step further. And the Rebbe says, and it's very common that this is done, that when you make a Siyum, you see if you can connect the end of the Mesechta to the beginning of the Mesechta. The Rebbe quotes the Gemara, Mesechta Brachos, Daf Yud. The Gemara says, Kol Parsha Shahoisa al Chaviv al David, any parak in Tehillim that David HaMelech was particularly fond of, Pasuk ba Ashrei, he began with the word Ashrei, v'sayim ba Ashrei, and ended the last pasuk with Ashrei. So the Rebbe says, and there are many, Tosfos says this, that's not dafka the word Ashrei. It's not the word Ashrei that makes the difference. The point is that when you want to show something is significant and important, you end the speech and you begin the speech with the same concept, with the same words. So, says the Rebbe, that Rabbeinu HaKadosh, as he was making a Siyum on Mesechta Chagiga, wanted to follow that same style. And what's the first machlokes we have in the Mesechta? The first machlokes we have in the Mesechta is the Gemara discusses, the Mishnah, the Gemara, the first part of our Mesechta discusses very extensively the kabbanis that were required to be brought on Yontif. Every Yontif, every Jew had to bring a Shalmei Chagiga and an Oilus Re'iyah, a carbon oil and a carbon shlomim, aside from the Shalmei Simcha. And there's machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, what is the minimum you need to spend on these kabbanis? Beis Shammai Amram Hariyah Shtei Kesef, the carbon oil has to cost at least Shtei Kesef, the Chagiga, and the carbon Chagiga has to cost minimal one kesef. 2 more for the oil, minimally 1 more for the carbon shlomim. Beis Hillel hold just the opposite. Hariyah more kesef, the oilus re'iyah is 1 more, and the Chagiga minimal, and the Chagiga is Shtei Kesef. So we have a very, very fundamental machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. Which carbon do I have to spend more on? And in fact, I saw, when we learned the Gemara, Daf Vav, that explains this machlokes, that even if Baruch Hashem, you'll have an individual who could afford to spend more than the minimum. Beis Shammai will always say, you have to always spend more on your carbon oila than on your carbon chagiga. And Beis Hillel will always hold, even if you're spending Baruch Hashem more, you could afford it, you always have to spend more on your chagiga, on your shlomim, than your oila. What's the basis of their machlokes? So the Gemara explains. Beis Shammai says, which carbon is more significant? The carbon oila. The carbon oila is kula oila Hashem. It goes off a carbon to the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's why it's the more significant carbon, and that's why, says Beis Shammai, that is the carbon I should spend more on. Beis Hillel, on the other hand, says that no, the carbon shlomim, there's so many people that benefit from that carbon shlomim. The Mizbeach gets a share, the Kahanim get the chaz v'shoik, they get their share, the owners get most of the carbon, most of the meat, they get their share, everybody gets something. So if I look at the details, the carbon shlomim is so much more valuable than the carbon oil. What's the machlokes? Says the Rebbe. Beis Shammai says, I look at what's in front of me. If I'm asked a question that I have to answer quickly, oil or shlomim, which is a more chashuv carbon? Of course the oil is a more chashuv carbon. And that's why Beis Shammai says, you look at what you see. I see the carbon oil, I see the carbon shlomim, you spend more on the carbon oil. That's the more chashuv carbon. Beis Hillel says, no, I'm supposed to look at the details. And if I look at the details, the shlomim, as we just explained, has all of these details. The owners, and the kahanim, and the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if I look at the details, I should spend more on the shlomim than on the oila. So again, the beginning of the Mesechta represented a machlokes. What do I look at? Do I look at the details? Beis Shammai says, I look at the big picture, the oila versus the shlomim. Beis Hillel says, I look at the details. And the end of the Mesechta, we have the exact same machlokes. Rabbi Elazar, the Shamuti, the Talmud Beis Shammai, says, I look at this keli, and this keli has a tzipui. And the tzipui is not significant, so it's tahar. And then Beis Shem and the Chacham and Beis Hillel said, no, we have to look at all the details. What's under the tzipui? All those details have to be taken into consideration. And it's a perspective to life. What should we look at? Should we just look at the big picture, or every detail of life is important? And we know that certainly in this world, we paskin like Beis Hillel. And in this world, we have to look at every detail. And we have to try to work that every detail in our avodas Hashem should be perfect. Because when we live a life that every detail is perfect, we will ultimately achieve the goal, that the entire picture will be perfect. And we will take a bizoicha that when we have Klal Yisrael on such a matzav, that all of our details in Shmiras HaTorah and Shmiras HaMitzvahs and avodas Hashem are the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will say, this is the binyan, this is the building that I wanted you to build, and that's the binyan of Beis HaMikdash that we should be zoicha to see b'meher b'yameinu.